So as I mentioned in my last video, this is still primarily a tech channel, but I do want to talk about other things that interest me, and today I want to talk about Formula One. So if you haven't been following the story, basically you had this complaint leaked about Christian Horner involving some text messages as well. People have been wondering who was behind it, and it seems pretty clear that it was Jos Verstappen, who is Max Verstappen's dad. Basically, there's been a rift between him and Christian Horner, and Jos Verstappen is trying to drive Christian out of Red Bull. It's been pretty clear that Red Bull management is sticking behind Christian because Christian has made them like the most successful, one of the two most successful Formula One teams, of the past decade and a half, and probably of all time. So now there's a speculation that Max Verstappen is going to move to Mercedes. And as a Red Bull fan, full disclosure, I'm a Red Bull fan. I don't really care. Like, Max Verstappen can go to Mercedes all he wants. I believe that in this car, maybe like 6 or 7 different drivers could win the world championship, even with Max Verstappen in Mercedes, even with Max Verstappen in a Ferrari. So here's why I believe that. I don't actually think that the drivers actually have that much of an impact on their performance. Like, I think that we've gone to a point in Formula One. Like, there's definitely a point where drivers mattered a lot, especially in the days of Fangio. But nowadays, drivers don't actually matter that much. So let's look at Formula One standings from 2021. This was Valtteri Bottas's last year with Mercedes. So Valtteri Bottas scored 226 points that year, and George Russell scored 16. Right. So the next year, Valtteri Bottas leaves Mercedes, goes into a back-of-the-pack car, and George Russell leaves Williams and goes to Mercedes. What happens? George Russell scores 275 points, finishes 4th, and Valtteri Bottas really overperforms with 49 points, but still only scores 49 points in an Alfa Romeo, right? Like, you see this huge drop-off of a person who, Valtteri Bottas, I mean, people talk about him as if he's like a number 2 driver, but being a number 2 driver at Mercedes, you still have to be really good, and he actually finished second multiple different years, so he is a very competent driver, but you put him in Alfa Romeo, he's not going to be able to do much of anything. But, like, even if you want to make that argument that Valtteri Bottas, oh, he's not that great, let's look at some other drivers. Okay, so we have Sebastian Vettel. This is 2013, Sebastian Vettel's last championship with Red Bull, right? So Sebastian Vettel scores 397 points, and Mark Webber, his number 2, scores 199 points. In the same year, Daniel Ricciardo, who's driving in a Toro Rosso or whatever it was called back then, scores 20 points, right? What happens the next year? The Red Bull car takes a step back. The Mercedes really takes a step forward. And Daniel Ricciardo, who scored 20 points in the year before, when you put him in a Red Bull, scores 238. And Sebastian Vettel took a step back, scored 190. Right? So, like, you literally just swap out this car, and this guy goes from scoring 20 points to 240 points. Right? Mark Webber, isn't on the grid anymore. But even like taking this step further, so that year, Ferrari had Fernando Alonso and I believe Kimi Räikkönen as well, right? So it wasn't really like that good of a car. It wasn't really going that well. So the next year, they upgrade the car a lot. They invest, and they also invest in getting Sebastian Vettel. What happens? These two drivers basically score very similar amount of points at the same year, right? And it's actually kind of crazy, right? Like look, like in Mercedes, Ferrari, and I can go through the rest of the list. I can look up who exactly was who in each of these years, right? Red Bull scores pretty much the same amount of points. I forgot what team Bottas and Massa were on that year, right? So like you see that there's this like really incredible hugging that happens between people who have the same car. You see this again in 2020, right? So in 2020, in 2018, Kimi Räikkönen is driving for Ferrari, and Charles Leclerc is driving for Alfa Romeo, right? 251.39. That year they swap cars. What happens? Charles Leclerc 264, Kimi Räikkönen 43. It's really just kind of the inverse of one for another. I forgot the point that I was gonna make with these 2 years, so I'm just gonna get rid of those. Anyway, so like let's look at the field for 2023. So Checo Perez, I know people like to ride him a lot, right? But like if Max Verstappen was not in Red Bull, Checo Perez, assuming he has like Zhou Guan Yu as number two, he clearly would have won the drivers' championship, right? You put Lewis Hamilton in that Mercedes, he would win the drivers in that Red Bull as a number one, he'd win the drivers' championship. Fernando Alonso, Charles Leclerc, I think Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, even George Russell would all win in that car. Some people who I think are kind of like on the edge, Oscar, Albon, Ricardo, Piastri, is a little young, but like who knows? You put him in that car in 2 years, I think he can definitely win a drivers' championship. The point is, like, if you look at all these standings, right? You have Red Bull, Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, like these results hug each other so much. And 2023 is even an outlier, right? Like look at 2022, right? Red Bull, Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, right? It's just the drivers don't really matter that much anymore, people. It's really just really you need a tier 1 or tier 2 driver in the best car and they're going to win. So all this to say, Max, go to Mercedes all you want. You're going to have the same fate as Sebastian Vettel, spend the rest of his career hoping to win a number championship, but never actually doing it. Anyway, like, subscribe, comment, and stay tuned for some more videos about tech.